Welcome everybody to another exciting episode, another edition of A Week in Geekdom here on YouTube. This is your host, Giovanni Menendez, and welcome back to the Invincible Ultimate discussion. This time we're tackling Volume 4 of our series. Of course, I'm talking about the hardcovers, which comprise of 11 issues of pure awesomeness. Folks, last time when we discussed Volume 3, a lot of things were set in motion. It left off in sort of a cliffhanger, and this pays off greatly and features some of my favorite panels in all of the series. It features some of the best art, some of the best stories. One of my favorite story arcs in the whole series is in this volume, so I've been waiting patiently to talk about this. Yeah, folks, Invincible is a great series. If you have not watched any of the Ultimate discussions that I've done, please step away now, read the volumes 1, 2, 3, and then come back to this video, because I don't want to be the one that ruins it for you guys. The art keeps getting fantastic book after book. I would say Ryan is nearing the peak of the awesomeness that is his art. And of course, Bill Crabtree is back for the colorings and all that stuff. Just a really dynamic, vibrant powerhouse. So far, they have turned out some of their best works. Obviously, as the series progresses, you're going to see really badass art that just keeps escalating to a point where it's just, it just blows what I'm talking about right here out of the water. But this, in my opinion, is the turning point where, you had that transition when he first started in Volume 2 and 3. Now we're nearing Volume 5 and 6, where things really heat up art-wise. This book continues the plot threads that were planted in the previous volume, and I think it does a really cool job of keeping you in your seat and moving forward at a fairly quick pace, solving most of the dilemmas while presenting new ones, and basically keeping the story going along pretty smoothly, in my opinion. Invincible last time was after he was trying to find out what happened to his college friend Rick, and he of course finds out that he's been taken underground and has been turned into a freaking cyborg by this evil looking douche that basically reminded me of like an evil looking version of Tom Hiddleston, if that makes any sense. But yeah, it just really fantastic right there. And just the way that he is torturing his victims, removing their vocal cords so they can't scream, and injecting some sedatives, and just basically killing and reanimating these characters, and basically transforming them into autonomous killing robot cyborgs. Just pretty gruesome if you think about it. And our friend Rick obviously is rescued, but for the rest of his life he's gonna miss an arm. Thankfully the government stepped in, as well as Invincible. They were able to save the day, and Rick is gonna get the treatment that he needs and reestablish and rebuild everything that was lost. He's gonna have cybernetic parts, but hey, better than nothing. And it's in this part of the story where we get our first major spike in the relationship between the government and Mark. It takes the collective effort of Invincible with the help of the US government to stop this monster, I believe his name was Sinclair, to to discontinue his work. Invincible thinks he's being put away, and this will come into play much later when Mark will learn of his true fate, and that Cecil is actually going to offer him a job to work for the government in what seems to be the creation of a basically zombie army that can be used to fight wars and not have to lose human lives, which on paper might sound okay, but ethically, morally, it sounds horrible, and we all know that things will not go as planned. We also see Robot and Monster Girl starting a sort of vanilla romance, and that is actually pretty interesting. Robot, of course, got a new lease on life and is basically living a brand new life, if you will, even if he's pretty old at this point. Same with Monster Girl. Due to different circumstances, they find themselves trapped in younger bodies, and they're learning from each other, but at the same time, Robot is committed to helping Monster Girl cure her aging dilemma with the monster situation. So I think that's a pretty interesting couple that if you already read past the book, you know it ventures onward pretty big time. And I'm very much looking forward to rereading all that stuff in the near future. Next up, the Lizard League. Pretty cannon fodder type enemies that turn out to be pretty important to this universe simply because it's this spoof on the Hydra agents from Marvel, but they turn out to be a pretty deadly force to be reckoned with. They are pretty harmless by themselves, but in groups, similar to Hydra, they are pretty wicked and pretty rough, especially when our heroes go in and try to stop them as they take control of a nuclear silo. Yeah, that is probably one of the more brutal fights, or actually massacres, in this series, because before this fight, like, yes, we had the Viltrumite fighting against Mark or Omni-Man and all that stuff, but that's to be expected because they're powerhouse characters with super strength. These guys, however, fight dirty. They are pretty brutal in the way they fight hand to hand and all that stuff. Immortal Man and Duplicate. Duplicate left Rexplode after Rex cheated on her, and now she married Immortal Man. And when the whole team of the Guardians of the Globe get a distress signal from the government, we find out that there is this huge ship that's coming down to Earth. We later find out that it's actually the Martians that are coming down. In previous volumes, I think it was volume 2, where I talked about the whole mission to Mars and the little squid creatures that took control of that one astronaut that was abandoned. One of the Martians escaped with the team and substituted him. This comes into play pretty heavily in what is quite possibly one of my favorite stories within this title, within this book. I love this arc simply because it is space, it is action-packed superhero fun. There is a huge sense of dread and danger because everything could just explode at any moment with how dangerous the mission is. And the squids themselves, which I think they're called the Sequids. The Sequids, of course, are like jellyfish, if you will, and once they build upon this colony of themselves, this hive mind mentality, they gain a sort of conscience. Now, the Martians were told that they were subdued after they tried to take over. Some believe they weren't. Some they formed this conspiracy theory that they're using them as slaves in the planet, and our main Martian hero, if you will, Shapesmith, I believe that was his name, he's the one that has to reveal everything to the Guardians of the Globe, and they're not too happy because, hey, surprise, I'm actually a Martian, and the Martians are coming. So Cecil and the government assemble the Guardians of the Globe with every powerhouse that they can, including Invincible and Adam Eve. Now, this is very important, and I will get to that in a couple minutes. They all assemble and they venture into this Martian ship deep in space, and one of the coolest stories about heroes trying to stop the villains before time runs out in a pretty dramatic, epic fashion, basically fighting this swarm of sentient or mindless-looking zombie squids, starfish type creatures. That's a mouthful. And yeah, it's pretty damn great, and it's a page turner. Everything you're reading, or at least for me, I just wanted to keep going and see what transpires. There's this sense of urgency, like I've mentioned, and Kirkman is able to utilize this effectively, plus adding that flair and gusto with Brian Oatley's art. It just presents something that you would see on your anime or Saturday morning cartoons, but of course with, it's a little bit edgier, more violent, and just overall fun, man. It's really fun and harkens back to Marvel and DC Comics with missions like that, where the hero is trying to stop the bad guy in an epic, dramatic way. So I really enjoyed that arc, and of course they do stop him. But when I mentioned about Adam, Eve, and Invincible beforehand, Mark realizes that things with Amber are not going to work out. Amber is sort of kind of seeing this other dude. At first it started as friends, but she thinks and she's worried that she's developing feelings for him. And when Mark returns, it just confirms that fact, simply because, hey, what started as talking to this classmate turned into him being with her on multiple occasions, going to the movies, being in her apartment, and all that stuff. So, fights aside, the characters realize that, hey, maybe we're not really meant for each other simply because of the circumstances that we've grown into. And, people can relate to that, I guess, when you have a spouse or a partner that simply cannot be there, not because he or she doesn't want to, simply because exterior motives and forces impede that from happening. So I understand Amber and I understand Mark's viewpoint, which ultimately leads into Mark going to Africa and trying to find out, or at least get some advice from his longtime friend, Adam Eve, and they end up kissing, and is actually one of my favorite panels in earlier on in the story, which I have here. And I just think this looks amazing with the coloring and the setting, this being in Africa and all that stuff. It's here where they get the call with the Martians and all that stuff, and they go into space. So when that whole Martian situation is handled and they rescue the original astronaut after, I believe they used a sonic boom device that robot invented on the fly, they return to Earth with the astronaut. And cliffhanger, the astronaut is actually still infected with the sequids, so it's pretty fun. It leaves the door open like a horror story where you could see another adventure forming out of that incident. And I mentioned earlier about that brutal massacre, about that silo with the lizard people, the lizard gang, if you will. Since everybody's away in space, you gotta send in the B team, if you will, or the C team. And it was the Shrinking Hero, I think it was Shrinking Ray, Rexplode, and Duplicate. And they almost all of them die. Shrinking Ray gets eaten, I think that's his name, gets eaten. That is fantastic and horrific at the same time. I was not expecting that. Duplicate, if one of her survives, she's safe. The duplicates can die off, I guess. And at the end, we sort of find out that the bad guys actually took care of her and killed every single one. And you're just left like, damn, like they just took the wind out of you. The leader of the evil gang of lizard people shoots Rex in the frickin' head. He somehow survives that. We get an introduction to Brit, one of the many miscellaneous heroes. He's actually gonna come into play much later on with the Guardians of the Globe and all that stuff. But they end up saving Rex. He thinks he's devastated. Mortal Man just got married to Duplicate. They come back from the Mars mission and they find out, hey, 2 members of the Guardians of the Globe have passed away, and they are so devastated by this. Later on, we find out, hey, plot twist, not really. She kept herself in hiding. So all this time we were seeing clones and clones and clones. I do believe the original was safe and sound, so she's still around. And her brother also shows up in a very weird, convoluted way. Her brother is pretty maniacal and is up to no good compared to the rest of the characters. We get to see Alan the alien again, and he gets captured voluntarily by the Viltrumites, and we find out that Nolan is in the same ship. He's going to be executed for his crimes and all that stuff, so it's up to Alan to try and rescue him, so that leaves in an epic cliffhanger. And we also find out one of the female Viltrumites, I can't remember the name off the top of my head, she ventures to Earth to persuade Mark in his mission. Last episode we talked about how he was to be designated as the colonizer of planet Earth, and she's trying to persuade him about doing that and the benefits and all that stuff. Basically, like, the human race will experience like a century of glorious technological and peaceful existence and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, they're still gonna mine the hell out of the planet and turn everything into ash and move on. So really, it's not a deal whatsoever. And of course, Mark disagrees heavily. It's very reminiscent of Dragon Ball in the way the Saiyans were sent to different planets and all that stuff. And it wouldn't surprise me if that is some of the inspiration for what Kirkman wrote when it came to the Viltrumite Empire. You know, they're presented as reasonable people that are quick to anger, and we do see that basically when Invincible says, no, I'm not gonna do it. she gets really pissed off just like that. There's a couple more subplots that happen, but nothing too major that I want to talk about. Let me know down below what you thought about Invincible Volume 4, if you've read it. If not, and I just spoiled things for you, I am so sorry. So yeah, that's it. Volume 4 is fantastic. It just continues to escalate in the awesomeness factor. Tell me what you thought of Invincible, about Volumes 1 through 4 so far. And as always, guys, you can follow me on your favorite social media platform, from Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, and many more. Just type a Week in Geekdom, and I'm there for you guys. Alright, I gotta go. I have to read more Invincible and other cool stuff, and I will catch you on our next video.